Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to week 6. I've just come out of another Zoom session, so I'm a bit so excuse me if I stumble over my words this evening. All right. Oh, Pamela says that she's just sat through a 2.5-hour Zoom session. Okay, mine was about an hour and a half, Pamela, so not quite as long as yours, but I feel your pain. I feel your pain. All right, so not a whole lot of discussion tonight, some small amounts, but probably not quite as much as we had last time. All right, so I would like to acknowledge Dr. Megan Gibson and Dr. Lynn Zolo for their knowledge around the Reggio philosophy and their contributions to this session, their suggestions as well. All right, so workshop overview. This is what we are going to have a look at this evening. And of course, finishing up with a bit of an introduction to assessment task 2. So hopefully you have all had the opportunity to have a look through that and have some questions for me. I know that you haven't even got your first assessment task back yet, but you know, I think it's important because they follow on to each other that you do start thinking about it. And each week I'll have some activities on Blackboard for you to go through to help support you starting that. So I think we should have about a 2-week turnaround with your assessment task, and I'll try and give you as much feedback as possible to help you move into assessment task 2. Yeah, so, and I'm happy if you do have further questions in regards to my feedback. I'm happy to clarify or elaborate if you would like me to. Okay, so what is Reggio Emilia? How many of you are familiar with Reggio? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So, is it a person? Who do you think that is? Amelia Reinhardt?
Amelia Earhart?
Earhart? What did I say? Reinhardt? Oh, I am tired. Is it a school? Or is it possibly a great new service that follows the Emilio Parmigiano philosophy? It's nice, it's different, it's unusual. Sorry, my family, we've been watching a lot of Kath and Kim in lockdown. That was one of my favorite episodes. Amelia Earhart, I like that. All right, so Kath and Kim were pretty close. It's nice, it's different, it's unusual. So it certainly has become very popular over the last 15 years or so. Definitely since I completed my undergraduate studies and my undergraduate qualifications. And I've chosen to concentrate on the Reggio philosophy this week because of this keen interest and also because of the influence that it's had on approaches to early childhood education and care in Australia and also in other countries as well. It has been very influential. So the Reggio philosophy is a blend of theory and of practice, and it challenges educators to see children as capable and competent learners. So this has come up a lot in our workshops. And I think this is because a lot of Malaguzzi's inspirations have really impacted on, in a positive way, I guess, but that's a matter of opinion, I guess, on the development of curriculum and pedagogy in Australia. So it very much differs from the widely accepted Piagetian perspective that views child development as largely occurring in stages. So Malaguzzi, so the inspiration behind Reggio, he emphasizes that it's not so much that we need to think of the child who develops by themselves, but rather of a child who develops through interacting and developing with others. So this is a very important part of Reggio. So I think as such, the core of the Reggio philosophy is its emphasis on building and sustaining relationships. This is very vital in the philosophy. So I think much like Vygotsky, Malaguzzi believed that social learning processes, it's my cup of tea. Thanks, hon. Sorry. Now you all want a cup of tea too, don't you? So, very much in terms of Vygotsky, that social learning precedes cognitive development, with the development, with the environment playing a very central role in the process of making learning meaningful for students, for children. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about it as well. So the inhabitants of Reggio nell'Emilia usually call their town by the simple name of Reggio. It has over 170,000 inhabitants. It's in an affluent city of northern Italy in the Reggio Romagna region, and it's the capital of the region Bologna. So the city it relies very heavily, invested very heavily in social policy, and it's very committed to the elderly and also to children as well. So it has 80 different schools and 100 different ethnic groups, which is pretty amazing. It's a very diverse area. And as we know, it has also been hit very hard with COVID-19 cases and deaths. So it was really badly hit over the last year or so. And I think the fact that the population is so elderly was very significant in this as well. And very much a big focus on community. So the whole lockdown situation was a big issue over in Italy, as we know. Okay, and I've got a little dot on the map. So I think Lynn Zolo and Megan, they're academics at the that I work with, they actually went and visited. So to them, lucky ladies. So yeah, very interested in that particular area of the world. Has anyone been to Italy? Yeah, Natalie has. Lucky thing. I haven't been to Italy. I've been to Greece, been to Turkey. Haven't been to Italy though. Okay, so it was Loris Malaguzzi who became the inspiration behind the educational experiences in Reggio. So he was a primary school teacher who later went on to study psychology, and this is very clear in some of his beliefs and understandings about practice. So he described himself as stubborn and as having an iron will, and I think he would needed to have an iron will. The influence that he's made is quite astounding. So he worked tirelessly with colleagues in Reggio to further his understanding on how children learn and to publicise his passionate belief in his image of competent and confident children. So the first preschool in Reggio originated after Liberation Day in 1945. So it was built by local families and the community in a period after the war with, deep hardship and adversity. So over the next 40 years, a network of preschools and infant toddler centres were developed. So the Reggio preschools have since been hailed as some of the best preschools in the world, with their approaches being adopted worldwide. So most significantly for us, they've had profound influences on Australian early childhood education and care, and continue to do so. So Malaguzzi famously wrote his book, The 100 Languages of Children. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. He believed that the wider the range of possibilities that we offer children, the more intense their motivations will be, and therefore they will be, having much richer experiences. He suggests that we must widen the range of topics and goals, the types of situations that we offer for children, and their degree of structure. So he also talked about the kinds and combinations of resources and materials that we use, and the possible interactions with things, with peers and adults. I just adore this image. So many of the images in the Reggio environments are just incredible. Absolutely beautiful. Just the colours and such attention to detail. So before I go on, I just want to have a chat about your previous experiences with Reggio approaches. I know some of you have worked in Reggio-inspired settings before. Are any of you here tonight? The chat. It's influenced Fiona. It's influenced in other schools as well, the approach. So not just early childhood, it does have an impact on other schools as well, but mostly in early childhood prior to school settings. Good question. So no one's had any significant, or not even significant, just a little bit of
I've had
experience?
some, Angela.
Yeah, would you like to share that? I'd love to hear that.
Oh, well, when I say some, I've been in 2 different services who are Reggio inspired.
Mm-hmm.
One of them used the Reggio to say that we don't use, they were saying that we use more natural products, but we didn't necessarily. And that we should use, for some reason they used fairy lights rather than the, so they wanted to use fairy lights in the room rather than the lighting that we did have, because it was too bright.
So who was that? Who wanted to use that?
That was what the service was using, fairy lights in the room. So it was dimmer lighting, because that was
more aesthetically
better.
pleasing.
Well, I don't know quite where it came from, because I couldn't find it.
No.
Anyway,
See,
it just seemed to be something that they picked and went, oh, this sounds very Reggio, let's just say we do that.
And this
I was like,
is
oh,
the
okay.
issue. Yeah. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later. I think a lot of so-called Reggio inspired tend to actually miss the point of what it's all about.
Yeah,
so,
whereas the other service I'm in now is a bit more likely to be closer to the point, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the children really are the centre. Like, they have a concurrent program, so the children have very much agency. They can choose indoor, outdoor, and whichever activity they've got all of the rooms. One room is the construction room. One room is for the arts, so we have a piano and as well as other arts in there, and we have a relaxation room. And the outdoors, they have a mud pit and they have a sand pit and they have a climbing tree and they have other things, so that it's more, I would think, closer to the point of Reggio than stringing up some fairy lights and saying that we're very Reggio because we,
yeah.
Yeah. So that's my experience.
Oh, that's interesting. Sometimes the similarities are drawn between Montessori and Reggio, but there are quite some fundamental differences, I think, between the two. I think Montessori schools, I think it's more the academic differences, because Montessori schools tend to focus more on academics. So in particular, they emphasize work over play-based approaches. Reggio is more project inquiry based and open-ended, and they place more emphasis on the arts than Montessori schools. So I think technology is also another area where they really differ. So Montessori would advocate for very little technology, whereas Reggio schools really embrace it, especially for documentation. So children and educators use cameras, video recorders, and tape recorders as well, like to tape children speaking. So there's a stronger emphasis on multimodal learning, which is quite interesting as well. Yeah. Has anyone had much experience with Montessori? No. So I guess my interest was sparked, with my introduction to emergent curriculum in the mid-90s, because it was that more of a move away from the Piagetian ideas with that developmental focus, like we talked about last time, like filling in the boxes. And it was more about, really recognizing that children have diverse strengths and needs and interests, and, differentiating for that diversity, and not just differentiating, but really valuing it. I think that's what inspired me, like, making sure that everyone's diverse, everyone's differences and similarities were accepted and really made part of the learning environment. And then I developed an interest in Rinaldi's pedagogy of listening, and then I was just sold. So it really became a major part of my practice as an early childhood teacher. And I think as a teacher in primary as well, taking some of those inspirations into the primary setting, because it isn't just about the way you set out the environment or, indoor, outdoor activities. It's about how you value children and the image of children that you have as an educator. I think that's central to it, really. All right, so on the slide, you can see the philosophical position of Reggio. So at the centre is what I said, that education is a right and responsibility of the community. Education should involve mutual respect, and with the diversity of children highly valued. Educational services should construct a culture of childhood and promote democracy and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. That's a really big part of Reggio. It involves a system of relationships, so the active development of relationships, and that needs to be a central part of community life. So it's not just about the school or the centre, it extends way beyond that to community life as well. It really does promote the rights and potentialities of children, giving children a voice in their relationships, autonomy, creativity, and in their learning. So they have a big say in it. And of course, education needs to be accessible to all residents. Just checking the chat. So Helen, sorry, I missed that. You've worked in primary setting using Reggio, and Yifang, I had heard the teacher introduce this approach when I studied my bachelor's degree. Paid more attention to children's potential in creativity and interaction with the world. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the principles. So I wanted to unpack all of the principles and things, so we could sort of, I guess, draw some parallels to the early years learning framework. So children are considered as active protagonists in their growth and developmental process. So really encouraging participation of all stakeholders, children, parents, educators in the community. Listening is central. So it nurtures a welcoming, open and reflective learning environment. So going back to our communities of practice and that real love of learning in the school culture. So learning is a process of individual and group construction. Like, so project and inquiry-based learning is very much central. So ethical and educational research is essential in interpreting the complexity of the educational approaches. So it's not just we're going to do it this way. They actually constantly research, so collect data on what's happening in the learning environment. That's a major part of it. So everything is backed up with scholarly research. Very important. And educational documentation is integral to their theory and practice. So they refer to projectazione, so a strategy of thought and action respectful of learning process, so not focused on a predefined curriculum. So organisation is central to child development. So very, very thoughtful organisation of spaces, of time, resources and structural values and choices. So they really have an interconnection between environment, space, and relationships. So they're all interconnected. And professional learning, of course, is central to building understanding and awareness. And in terms of assessment, any assessment for learning needs to have meaning and also value to the children. So on the slide are some key values that we will unpack in the session. So relationships, image of the child, image of the family, image of the teacher, listening, education, pedagogical documentation, and rights. So some of them we've discussed before, which emphasises the strong influence of Reggio on Australian pedagogy and curriculum. So as someone noted before, very strong links to the early years learning framework. Who was that? Pamela. Well spotted. So a pedagogy of relationships. We talked about this in week 4. So it's a term coined by Malaguzzi. This pedagogy includes the relationships both within and between groups of children, teachers and families, and within the context of that continual dialogue with the community. So always bringing the community in. And I've added this image here as well because the community, as I said, there is a very strong focus with the elderly, really respectful of the elderly and valuing their contributions as well. Very important. So Malaguzzi states that from birth, I'll read this out. This is a quote of his. So from birth, children are in a continuous relationship. They have this need, this desire to master interaction, to be a protagonist one time, to be listener another time, and then to be a protagonist again. So for children, dialogue opens up this frame of playing different parts. So children have the great fortune to know how to pull thoughts and meanings from one another's words, basically is what Malaguzzi says. So with relationships being a necessity of life. So, you know, that children, those relationships are what builds children's initial understandings, and all of those understandings are going to vary between families and between cultures. So we need to be very respectful of that in children building their understandings and their beliefs and values. Again, exactly what we've discussed previously in terms of the principles of the early years learning framework. So your image of children will impact on relationships with them. So I want you to read these two statements, and in reading them, I want you to consider your own image of the child. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? So is your image one of a needy child, or do you subscribe to the rich child image, active, competent, and eager to engage in their world?
Or in my case, for sure, the rich child.
I guess this comes in as well to when we were talking about nature-based play and allowing children to take risks. Helen says, I look at children like little explorers, definitely the rich child. And Fiona says she seesaws between the two sometimes. I agree, Fiona. Sometimes I think it's very hard for us to consider children as being so capable. And I think that's because we tend to have a bit of a superficial understanding of what children can actually achieve. You know, to really understand children as active and competent, we have to listen carefully to them, like really understand their what they might be thinking. And because they have limited vocabulary, it's not just listening to them, it's observing their their nonverbal interactions. Fiona says it's tricky when you see a child struggling. Yeah. So in my eyes, I regard the child as a universe that allows for children to be rich. I love that. That's excellent. The environment, yeah. And individual experiences allow the children to be rich. Yeah. Excellent. Anything further that anyone wants to add? So if we have this idea of the rich child or the active child and the competent and eager to engage in their world child, how is this going to influence your interactions and relationships with children in a learning environment? No, I'm expecting too much of you at this time of night. Sorry.
Can you hear me, Angela?
I can hear you, Warren. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, no, I thought it went off. Well, I engage with them as rich, and I always ask open-ended questions about their experience or what they're doing at that time. I could give you a million and one examples, I'm sure, but it's always open-ended to find out where they're thinking, what they're thinking, and their future projection of whatever they're playing with or doing. And yeah, they obviously are active and competent about what they are learning in their world.
That's a good emphasis on their world, because
yes. Oh, for sure, it's their world. It's like I've had experience with autistic children from a very severe on the spectrum all the way to high functioning autism, and they live in their world. But we just, as you said before, we got to just listen to them and really listen to them. Sometimes they are capable of doing what they need to do to understand understand their world, and we just scaffold and help them explore it and learn it.
Yeah, excellent. Love it. Let's check the chat. So Pamela, I must say that I was challenged by the idea of seeing children as capable, maybe because I'm looking at them as little adults rather than thinking them as very capable where they are at. That's a good point. I think we can all say that we've done that. Jade, I've tried to view children with via a strengths-based approach. So if children are struggling to achieve something, we can adapt the environment so that all children experience success. Love it. I think the age of the child can also translate from rich to poor child. A baby birth under 1 is clearly vulnerable and could easily be viewed as a poor child, whereas an older child would seem rich. Yeah. So age is definitely a factor. I think that's why there has been so much emphasis on birth to 2 more recently as well, especially looking at how they are seen in the early years learning framework. You know, we have a tendency of grouping children as children, but really age is so significant because, you know, looking at that child there, how old do you think they are? 15 months? Those chubby little cheeks, about 2 or 3. I think they're younger than that. Interesting. Okay, so Malaguzzi's image of the child, as we said, is rich in potential, strong, powerful, and competent, and most of all, connected very much to adults and children. So fundamentally, it's an image of the child that is who is a subject of rights. And so this is highlighted in the creation of a charter of rights, so a manifesto of the rights of parents and teachers as well as children, which is in every Reggio school. It states that children have the right to be recognised as subjects of individual, legal, civil and social rights as both source and constructors of their own experience, and thus active participants in the organisation of their identities, their abilities and autonomy through relationships and interaction with their peers, with adults and ideas, with objects, and with the real and imaginary events of intercommunicating worlds. So that is, I think I popped that in the reference list because I think it's a really lovely quote in terms of really seeing the child as someone who has rights. So the UN, isn't the UN one called the Declaration of the Rights of the Child? Pamela, what do you mean?
Sorry, I didn't realize that I was muted. Yeah, I'm just asking, isn't that what the document is called, the Declaration of the Rights of the
Yes.
Child? I'm not sure. Yeah.
But the quote is from A Journey into the Rights of Children, the Unheard Voice of the Children's series, Reggio Children. So yeah, it's comparing nursery staff and children in Italy, Spain and the UK. So just in terms of the rights of the child, how different countries, I guess, see the rights of children in terms of a charter, or is it just, you know, it's easy for us to say that children have rights, but what does that mean in practice?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a quote from Rinaldi. So to move from the child as a subject of needs to a subject of rights. So reflecting on this statement, what do you think the implication, what do you think this the implication does this have for creating curriculum? If we start thinking about children as a subject of rights. So I would definitely imagine that it's, that children are recognised as active participants in the construction of their own knowledge, and that they need to have control over the direction that their learning takes. That their rights, need to be taken into account when we're planning curriculum, says Pamela. Lines become blurred with freedoms and liberties, entitled to explore their interests. Yeah, all good points. Thank you. I think, go on,
Sorry,
Lauren.
would this be also part of ELF with like the responsiveness to children? I think it's the practice or principle, one of them.
Yeah.
So you respond to the children's rights and you set the direction of their learning?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's also making sure that we see the early years learning framework or the curriculum as a guide. It's adaptive, and to make sure that we were talking about a few weeks ago that it's driven by the child. So that emphasis on exploration and creative expression and active learning, but still in that nurturing and relaxed environment. I think that's very much in terms of Reggio, where they're going with having children having rights. So in emergent curriculums, in these environments, both adults and children, as we discussed, have initiative and they make decisions. So we were talking about power, and so adults, they're a big part of the decision-making process. But this power to impact curriculum decisions and directions means that sometimes, the curriculum does need to be negotiated between the interests of the children and also, I guess, interests and safety of the children, and also what families share and know about children as well. So what are the beliefs and practices within the family that influence children? Some parents may not like their children getting dirty. They may not like them playing in the mud patch. They may not like them climbing up trees like we saw in the nature play clip. So we really have to make sure we take that into consideration, but also what families share about children in terms of their actual interests as well. So, seeing the family as a really important part of developing curriculum. It's a big part of Reggio. So this is from Jade. Curriculum must be developed whilst taking into account individual children's diversities. All children have the right to access and participate in education, which is relevant to their lives, communities, and families. Yeah, so child-centered, that's right. Yeah, excellent. With an entitlement to explore their interests. Yeah. So the emergent curriculum and inquiry-based curriculum, as we've seen in some of the clips that we've watched, the Lizard one and various ones that we've had a look at, really that family input and the community input is vital, because this is where children grow up. This is their real worlds. This is what they actually relate to. We can teach children, read them stories, but if they're not related to what their actual lives are about, then it's very hard for them to understand or even see what the significance of them is. And Kamiko has a good point there. The role of the family becomes less visible in primary school. That's definitely true. And then almost not visible at all in secondary, which is terrible, because this is when I think young people, when adolescents really need the community around them, I believe. We had quite a long discussion about this in the session that I had previously. So just a little bit more nitty gritty about Reggio. I found this really interesting when I read about it, but there's about 75 children in a Reggio preschool, so in 3 to 4 classrooms. and 2 teachers in each classroom. And there are also on top of that 2 specialist teachers as well. So one is the pedagogista. So this is an educational advisor who actually works within the municipality and with multiple schools. So they help teachers to improve their skills of observation, or skills of listening to children as well. So they value active listening as an important skill. About documenting, so how to document projects, and also about how to promote and conduct data collection and research within their services as well. So the second specialist teacher is called an Altarista. It's a bit of a mouthful. So they have special qualifications in art education. They help teachers see all of the visual possibilities of child's projects that may not be quite as apparent to them. So they're actual specialists in this area. So the Atelierista helps other teachers and also children to organise and to carry out all those large ongoing projects that we see in Reggio schools, as well as smaller sort of independent activities that children are working on as well. So they act as a consultant. They meet with the teachers several times a day. They show them how to introduce new concepts to the children. They give them advice on how to stimulate the children's curiosity and to guide them to help children in different paths, very much like the artists that came into the school, into the community with the Legless Lizard clip that we watched. I kind of see parallels. When I was watching that clip, I kind of really thought of her as one of these Atelieristas. So very interesting. So the Atelierista, they also provide workshops about arts, creativity and documentation. And they also serve as an editor and a designer of the documentation in the learning environments as well. So I think the school, the teachers work, I think it was 36 hours a week, and they have direct contact hours, they have programming time, staff meetings, professional learning time, and also meetings with families as well. So it's all very ordered and structured in time in terms of the roles and responsibility. Do they have religious elements since Italy is a Catholic nation? I think in terms of religion, because it's so diverse in terms of different cultures, I am not sure. I would imagine that they would encourage and value lots of different religions. Kamiko, I couldn't answer that specifically. It's not something that I've read about. Ryan says so different from the majority of ECEC in Australia. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the pedagogy of listening, because this is one of the reasons why I actually became very interested in Reggio. So Carla Rinaldi, you may have, I've had some of her work in the readings that you may have come across. So listening, you know, it means following the children's lead and recognizing that children learn through co-constructing. So I guess she uses a metaphor of catching a ball that the children throw us to illustrate that reciprocal nature of learning between children and adults. I thought that was a good analogy, actually. So she also talks about how the pedagogy of listening enables the pedagogy of relationships, which I thought was pretty cool. So there are two very broad aspects of this approach, but both involve relationships with the social and also the physical environments as well. So one aspect relates to learning and teaching, and it involves a search for meaning and understanding for children and adults. And the second is more of a political approach. So that involves what she referred to as a democratic dialogue with families and the broader community. So it's more about culture and politics as well. So it's more emphasis on the whole community. So I guess it also talks about listening to children's theories, so how that enhances the possibility of discovering how children think and how they question and develop a relationship with reality, I guess, or what they think reality is, how they develop their perceptions and things. It's really quite fascinating because you can really see Malaguzzi's psychology influence coming in here with some of the principles as well. But that pedagogy of listening, so that active listening, is vital, and especially in terms of developing those relationships. So I think it's something that we all need to be conscious of in our practice. So making sure children know that we're aware of what they're saying, accepting their perspectives, appreciating their contributions and their understandings. So, you know, you're all probably very much aware of active listening, but, you know, making sure that we maintain eye contact, you know, just making sure that we give them our full attention, not interrupting them when they're speaking, so paraphrasing so that they know that you have a correct understanding. I think Rinaldi says it's about listening with your heart for total meaning and total understanding as well. And as Warren says, Kamiko says, how does this translate to 0 to 2 who are still developing their language, or ELD learners? Exactly as Warren said, so language is not always verbal. And it's also sensory too. So that's really important. We'll move on to that when we start talking about the environment as a third teacher in coming weeks, but sensory learning is a big part of Reggio as well. So hearing, tasting, smelling, so making sure that the environment, it does cater for children's diverse understandings, their different ways of learning and listening and communicating as well. And Kamiko says language is cultural because some cultures do not value eye contact. That's a good point, Kamiko. Yeah. So of course, I guess with all early childhood teachers, we have to be sensitive to cultural needs and values as well. A very good point. And Linda says that young children can still communicate with their body. Language, example, pointing, passing you items, sitting in your lap, walking over to you with a big smile, touching your face. I love that, playing with your ears, and, you know, all of touching is so important for babies, isn't it? It's so lovely. And as they get older, it becomes less. How does this translate to people who are mute or have hearing problems? Well, again, Kamiko, this is something that you would really need to take into consideration in any early years environment or any learning environment at all, to really make sure that you take those into consideration. When I was teaching, we had a couple of students that were deaf, actually, and we had, in the school, there was a trampoline that had speakers under it, and the children would lie on the trampoline and they would feel the music through the, what do you call it? Bouncy part, not the net. You know what I mean? Yeah, so there's so many different ways of communicating with people, sign language, all sorts of things. Yes, so cultural competence, it's a big issue in the early years learning framework. Good point. Yep, and Helen Keller was mute and deaf and changed the world. She certainly did. Yep, vibration. Thanks, Helen. Bed of the trampoline. Thanks, Pamela. And you're tighter than what I am. Well done. All right, so listening with your heart for total meaning and understanding. So, you know, whether, no matter what the child is, taking into consideration all of their diverse needs as well. All right, so environment as the third teacher. So this is something that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about tonight because we're actually going to focus on it in depth in week 9. But in terms of the environment in Reggio, they refer to it as ateliers. So that's the Reggio environment. So they promote knowledge and creativity, suggesting questions and generating evocations. So they're described by Malaguzzi as beauty that produces knowledge and vice versa. He's full of it, isn't he? He's got all of these amazing sayings. Yeah. So he says that there is these ateliers are places where the 100 languages of children are enacted. So an atelier, so the environment, and the atelierista, the specialist art teacher, have been present in each municipal preschool since the end of the 1970s. So this isn't new. This has been around for a long time. So they're an integral part of the Reggio approach and are in continuous dialogue with other spaces and other educators as well. So the atelier is the art room, but they're very much in touch with all of the other spaces in the learning environment as well. And as we know, Reggio speaks of the environment as the third teacher. So provocations, I talk about provocations all the time, and we have provocations. I pose questions to you or images to you, and this is to prompt thinking, to prompt critical reflection, exploration, inquiry, engagement, and wonder in children. So children, educators, parents, and the environment are all potential provocations. You know, they enable children to develop skills of inquiry, creativity, inventiveness, things like flexibility and thinking, planning, and also reflecting as well, I think. So Reggio educators very carefully and thoughtfully enable engagement via provocations. So, and this can be by posing questions or provocations, or it could be taking up children's own provocations as well, to explore certain ideas or events that they bring to the learning environment. And we talked about sustaining these kind of projects or provocation in previous weeks. So Reggio talks about providing materials, providing time, space, people, and skills that support children's ongoing inquiry. So as I said, the atelierista, the trained art teacher, this is what their role is, to provide all of those experiences to sustain that. Yeah, an intentional teaching practice. Yeah. Okay, so a key idea, as we mentioned before, with Reggio is documentation. So that's an integral part of the process of learning. So rather than simply seeing it as a method of recalling or recording the experience, and having it available for parents to see. So it goes beyond that. It's part of the actual process of learning. So they see it as a search for meaning. So it's to help children find the meaning of what they do. So to revisit what they've actually done, what they encounter, and also what they experience. So it's the why, the how, and the what as well. So we're going to go into depth about this in week 10. So these are just little snippets that are part of the Reggio principles and practices, but I'm going to pull some of these really important focuses out and unpack them in more depth later on. So the Atelier Arista, they're the ones that make records of events about what's happening in the school, and they use it as a tool for research as well. So I guess a documentation. So this is seen not just as a record, but as actual data to collect and analyze as well. And it's become known as pedagogical documentation. So because of the really important role that it has in reflective practice. So it might be written notes, photos, videos, audio recordings, annotated children's work, all things that enable parents and children and teachers to discuss, I guess, to interpret and to reflect on their work. And I guess it's also about looking at their points of view in their artwork as well. I guess it's a way of understanding what children are thinking. Very much now in, well, early childhood, but more in primary and secondary as well. Graphic organisers have become the thing these days in terms of encouraging children to visually represent what they're thinking, which is, I'm sure some of you that are primary and secondary teachers, but graphic organisers seem to be very popular. So these sort of pedagogical documentation, it supports decision making as well. So it helps us to understand the best ways to proceed, you know, the follow-ups from previous learning, and to help us make decisions about what to do next. So I think it really does as well still the importance of making children's learning visible to parents, to teachers, and of course to themselves. It really, you know, these are beautifully displayed, and I think that demonstrates to children that we really value them and their thinking and their creativity. And it supports children as being active and capable and competent learners and creators, artists. Yeah, and as I said before, it allows children to revisit their work, and I guess to a certain extent to evaluate it as well. Yeah, and of course it allows you to make decisions about the curriculum. So Pamela says, about a decade ago, when I was teaching in Victoria, we were immersed in graphic organisers and thinking tools, but as teachers and teaching and encouraging the students to learn them. Yeah. Visual thinking routines are also useful in early primary years. Can you explain what you mean by that, Pamela?
Hi. Yes, I have a year 2 class, and we have been using the visual thinking routines as part of our international baccalaureate program with provocations, and to see what children's thinking is all about around what we're talking about.
Cool. Very
That's
good.
Yeah, there's a big movement from the Zero Project over in America about visual thinking routines. So I guess I come from it from an early primary perspective. Yeah. And it shows their thinking. And you were talking about listening and things like that. And so therefore you can see what each child is thinking within their visual thinking routine.
Yeah. And I think
the graphic and the graphic organizer that goes with it. So
yeah, definitely, because it's not it helps us to see what they're thinking, but also how they think as well. So we've got some of our first years in stepping in the Bachelor of Education. So early childhood, primary and secondary, got 750 of them. Just their assessment just came in the exact same time as yours. And they had to do a graphic organizer to describe teachers as learners, teachers as professionals, teachers as change agents, and teachers as practitioners. So they used a graphic organizer to organize that. And God, some of them are really cool, you know, just some of what they came up with and how they actually thought about how they were interwoven, you know, teacher as learner and teacher as change agent, all of those things. It was fascinating. So I love this image. Absolutely love this image. Makes me want to go there. So a major focus of Reggio program, like our program, Early Years Learning Framework, is observation, which goes hand in hand with documentation, of course. So teachers routinely take notes and photographs and make recordings of group discussions and children's play. And then they meet each week to focus on their observations. So teachers, the Ateliarista and the Pedagogista, they review the documentation and strive to hear the strongest currents of interest within the children's flow of ideas. Because I think, from what I gather, some of these projects are big. So what I've often wondered is, so if they've got this huge project going, how many of the children are actually instigators of this idea? So I read that it's the strongest currents of interest within the children's flow of ideas. So there would be bigger projects going, but then individual children would have smaller ones as well. So I could just imagine so much going on in the environment. So, you know, what they learn from the observations, they then plan activities and projects that are based on the children's interests. So this then helps them to gain more insights into the children's personalities and into child development as a whole. And I think a huge part of that, I imagine, would be how they analyse and interpret the children's artwork and the questioning that they use or don't use about the children's artwork. I find that really interesting. And we're going to talk further about that when we break down documentation. Okay, so we're almost there. I think what we were talking about before as you know, there's lots of words that we use, Reggio inspired or doing Reggio. I think basically what Malaguzzi says, there is no recipe for how to do it. So, you know, while the principles, I guess, of the Reggio approach have been used to inform pedagogy and the Australian curriculum itself, you can't really do Reggio because it's very contextual, I think, and it is more about the way you view children, you know, a holistic view of children. So I think, you know, we really need to take into account of the specific contexts and cultures of the learning environment, because it's easy to miss that underlying provocation that Malaguzzi puts forward, which is, you know, to reflect on what is education for. I think in terms of culturally, if we don't reflect on that question, what is education for in your context or your country or your culture, then if it, you know, there's not much point really, is there? So it is very contextual. So just to to finish up this quote from Malaguzzi. I'll let you read it a few times. I'll ask you to maybe share what you think that means to you personally, because it will mean different things to different people, obviously. Any thoughts? I think for me, it really does make me think that we need to stop and observe and actively listen to individual children. So to carefully reflect on their understandings and their interactions, and really think purposefully and thoughtfully about how we're going to move forward. You know, to really think about every decision we make in the learning environment. And I guess also not to assume that you really know or understand a child. You know, I don't think we can say, yes, I know exactly what that child is thinking or how that child is feeling. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we can. We can have an inkling, but children's moods and feelings, their temperament, their understandings change so quickly, don't they? Who else would like to share?
I was going to jump in very quickly.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, look, the way I understood it is something that I sort of practice in my own role in schools. So I'll always say, you know, the teaching part is when the teacher's instructing, explaining. The learning will always come from the children. And there's always a variance of how the students are going to interpret what you're conveying to them. So I guess, you know, I could ask them to do a story or recount or whatever it is. And, you know, some children will have a different interpretation of what I've asked them for. So I'll usually see what result I'll get from that. And I'll think maybe next time I should have given this sort of direction to lead them to the right way. So I think it's all about reflective practice and looking at how the children are interpreting what you're trying to convey to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, that's good, Helen. Very good. Yeah.
And I'll just add for that, because I did have my hand up earlier. So I think I said that I had worked in a Reggio setting. And in primary setting, it is, I think, very different, because I think it was only for a short period and it was adopted across a stage 2. And the foundation of it was an open learning classroom. And what it was 2 classrooms with no dividing doors and 2 teachers, at least 2 teachers, some with, you know, an aide or whatever, or additional teachers, both teaching or team teaching, and then children having the freedom to move about the 2 classrooms, and then, you know, either sitting on bean bags or stand-up tables, doing their research on computers, or there'd be some textbooks there. It was very open learning. So I just thought I'd mention that because I didn't get a chance before. But yeah,
No, that's good. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, sometimes you just have to butt in rather than putting your hand up, because
sorry.
I've just got so much happening on the screen. It's so, and I've got 3 screens. I've got 3 screens.
Oh my goodness, I've got one and I can't keep up. So yes, I understand.
Oh, I'm in my husband's recording studio, so it's
no
happening everywhere. So
fair enough.
Thank you, Helen. That was really insightful. So Pamela has said, it's very much about learning from children. I agree, definitely. If you haven't have understood, well, perhaps teaching will be different from before. Observe carefully what children do. Yeah. Fiona says, be sure to critically reflect on what you are doing and why. And Warren says, open your mind and enter a learning environment without bias or expectation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that? How do we do that though? Be very open-minded, I guess. Kamiko says, I think there is a powerful message here that children own their learning. It's their learning that it has to be authentic, relevant, and meaningful to them. Well done. I totally agree about the listening to the children, says Pamela, and also observing what is actually happening. Too often we are time poor. Yeah. And we just have to take the time to pause and reflect with the children. Yeah, we are. We're so time poor. And I think, with this, our curriculum, the way it is, we're just constantly rushing, trying to get everything done in the smallest period of time as possible. And things like active listening tend to slip by us. Anything else before we move on? We're just going to finally have a chat about assessment task 2. Okay. Right, so due Friday, May the 29th at 11:59. So 2,500 words. Oh, wait a minute. I think we've got another chat. Warren has said, in relation to children experiencing different moods, I always try to implement, what's that say? Heraclius's philosophy, we do not step into the same river twice. Oh, I like that. Kamiko says, is there evidence that children have gone through Reggio do better later in life academically and holistically? I don't know. I'm pretty sure that it's a much more easygoing lifestyle in Italy. People seem to be chilled, or maybe not at the moment. I don't know. I haven't actually heard about that. I'm not sure. Kamiko says Australia isn't, South Australia isn't actually doing well in NAPLAN. My assessment sheet says due the 6th of June. Oh, what have I done? Oh yeah, this must be my old slides. Ignore that. So it's the date that's due that says on the assessment sheet. Ignore that. 2,500 words, including references. So action plan table included in the word count. We had that question last time. The action plan table is definitely included in the word count. So I advise you to use dot points and short phrases in the action plan table, and you can choose to have the, make it look, the action plan table to look whatever, you don't have to use that one, you can adapt it. Does the due date change, date change? No, it hasn't changed. It's still, I haven't got the assessment task right in front of me. Read out the assessment task, someone. What's the date?
June 6th.
June 6th. It's due on June 6th. This was from last year, the slide from last year. So ignore that. So it's 50%. So 50% from the last one. Assessment task 2 and 50% for assessment task 1. So predominantly this one is in first person. Again, will need to be succinct. You will be citing your first assignment when referring to your implications. I haven't got past student examples. It's just not possible because they're also completely different. They're all going to look completely different. So I haven't got a past student example. I I don't like to do that with this assessment task anyway, because, you know, I want you to have your own ideas. I don't want you to be influenced by what other people have done, because, you know, it's going to depend on the context, definitely. Again, check SiteRight for referencing support. I will give you some feedback on your SiteRight for your first assessment task. So if you've got quite a few issues with your referencing, I would hope then that it would be improved by assessment task 2. And you can also, as with the previous assessment task, the student support group are available there to help. So any questions at this point? The chat is so huge that it's taking up my entire screen. And I'm having trouble getting it down. There we go. All right. So probably haven't had a chance to look at the task description and criteria sheet yet. But I think what you need to do is really start to think about what you might consider doing. So it's very much based on your implication section of assessment task 1, as we've discussed previously. So that's your starting point. And then in 2 weeks, I want you to think about it now before then, because you've already got, some of you have already got ideas what you want to do for your action plan for your professional learning. So have a look at the feedback that I've given you. And you need to really think about what you're going to do next to extend your knowledge and inform your practice. So what do you need to know to inform your practice, to implement your new knowledge in your context or possible future context? What do you need to know? How do you want to change, modify, improve, or challenge about your current practices? And what do you need to do to support this implementation? So it might involve professional learning in some way. It might involve professional learning for you, or it might involve professional learning for your actual teaching context. So Linda has said, let's say we put a webinar course in our action plan table. Do we reference this or just put a link to the website in our table? So is this a webinar or course that you want to do, Linda? Yes. I would put a link to it and then reference it in your reference list. Yeah, but you would actually break down what it was as well, and outside of your table, and why you want to actually do that as well. What are the benefits? You know, how will that help you to support implementation of your new ideas? Helen, I said earlier on, 2 weeks. There'll be a 2-week turnaround. So I've got another unit that I'm marking as well. They're both due on the same day. Silly thing for me to do, but yeah, 2 weeks. Might be before that, but then they'll also have to be moderated. So hopefully that will be within the 2 weeks. So Kamiko says, the scope of my first assessment focused on ELD learner. Can I please look at ELD more broadly to include Indigenous aspect for this assessment? Can I think about that, Kamiko? And we'll have a chat about it later. Maybe send me an email and we can discuss it further. No worries, Helen. Any other questions? So I think mainly really thinking about, what will you do to extend your knowledge and inform your practice? So this is based on what you have learned or your new knowledge, your new understandings, the implications for your professional practice based on your first assessment task. So as I've said previously, they're very much linked.
Could I just ask, Angela?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in now since you've given me the go ahead.
Good. That's what I expect.
Lovely. So what will you do to extend your knowledge and inform your practice? So is it basically from our perspective, how we're going to respond to the action plan based on assignment 1?
Yeah.
Like personally, like
Yes,
it's our
personally.
personal view. But isn't that a bit, if that doesn't fit into what we're supposed to do in our current roles, isn't that a bit contradictory?
Well, I think you need to think of yourself as a change agent, Helen.
Okay.
Do you
I
want
can
to
do that.
change? Do you want to change the current practices in your context?
I would want to,
Yeah.
but is that going to be okay with, my workplace or my?
You
superior?
don't have to implement this. No,
Yeah.
no, you don't have to implement this. This
So
is
this is a
something.
hypothetical.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical,
Okay.
but a lot of people are doing it in that something that they're going to actually enact. Something that they, what they've actually did in their first assessment task is something that is really important to them in their professional practice. So they want to carry that, maybe it's more, play-based or inquiry-based learning to be used in their year 1 setting. Maybe it's developing their transition to school processes. So maybe it's going to be about developing a plan to assist communication with the local kindergarten and the prep teachers. It's going to be processes put in place. You're going to have to be thinking about, okay, I might have to get in, develop a workshop or something, or get some people to come in. So it's not just about you. It might be learning, professional development or professional learning for your colleagues as well. So think big. It could be,
Okay, because we are very limited in what we can, do freely,
Yeah, definitely. But if you're thinking in terms of your specific learning environment or classroom, you've got quite a lot of power there, really, haven't you?
To some extent. Yeah, it has backfired on me in the past, so that's why I sort of voiced that view that it's very restrictive.
Yeah.
When you're not at the top.
Yeah. Well, I guess in saying think big, you might have to think big with restrictions.
Okay. Sure thing.
Yeah, but I guess the most important thing to think about is you're reflecting on the research. So you looked at the literature, you looked at the research around the topic that you're investigating, and from that, what is the research saying? What is best practice? So what knowledge have you developed from that research, and what do you want to do with that in your learning environment?
Okay, thank you.
So Kamiko says she wants to know more about a pedagogy of listening with diverse learners and Reggio's images of child, family and teacher. You didn't mention them in assessment task 1 though, so you can't do that. Sorry, Kamiko. It's got to be complete. It's got to be about assessment task 1. So it has to be what you've researched, you've reviewed that literature, what you've researched, you then have to use that new knowledge and develop an action plan. So you can't go and erase that and start on something new. It has to be completely connected to that first assessment task that you've done. That's why I suggested that you might want to backtrack. But you want to be a change agent. Well, be a change agent in the area that you focused on. Next time, your PhD, Kamiko. All right, I think I've got one more slide here. So this is what the professional development plan looks like on Blackboard. It's just really basic. So, you know, it's just an example and you're free to modify it to create your own table. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be a table. It could be a mind map but those kind of headings are fairly important, I think. So your focus and rationale, links to curriculum and pedagogy, so specific activities or experiences that you might want to implement, resources, critical thinking strategies and limitations. You
And
might have a lot in that limitation section, Helen. Who was that?
it's me, Beck. And just questioning where it's got activities and it's like enroll in a program. Is that as vague as it needs to be? Or as I think someone else asked the question before, if you're saying enroll in a program or a course, are we then actually putting a link to what that course is or unpacking it there? And then obviously talking about the reasons why, etc., in outside of the plan. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense and a very good question. I would say
I'm happy to go with the vague though. Vague is good.
I'm going middle road. So enroll in a program about. But if you actually have a program that you want to enroll in, that's great.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I would love to think that some of these are actually going to happen. They have in the past, you know, that this is something
Yeah.
that you might be able.
I'm writing mine to actually enact within my school. Unlike Helen, I am in a position where this is going, it's not utopian, it's actually something that's going to be enacted over the next 18 months. So I'm very much looking at actual resources, actual processes. So where it just says, you know, materials or websites or community resources, I'd actually want to unpack exactly what those are, because if I spontaneously combust, somebody needs to be able to pick this up and know exactly the who, what, when, where, why, how.
Yeah.
And that can't happen if it's not within the plan, and that's how we work within the school.
Good. Well, I'm happy if you have a framework or a template or something that you need to develop for your school, by all means use that, as long as it's something that you can actually see that it is a plan. It's an action plan that, you know, does, you know, they're just basic things that you would need in an action plan. If you want more detail, go for it. Go for it.
Thank you. Within the word limit.
Within the word limit, that's right. So that's why we're looking at dot points, but you have got 2,500 words.
Yeah.
Can someone, I remember last year, is the 2,500 including the reference list?
Now, your slide before said including references. It didn't say include reference list, and I haven't got the.
Yeah, that's
sheet.
reference list. So it is including that. Yeah. I've got so many assignments from different units going around in my head at the moment.
It
Once
does
I'm
say
marking,
reference list not included.
reference list not included.
Yes, it's including direct quotes and in-text references, reference list not included in word count.
Thank you very
But that
much.
was for part A. Yep, and same for part B.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Because I think it was when I first.
Sorry, Angela, just to go on that, I'm reading now. It says length, this is right at the top, 2,250 to 2,500 words, including quotes, reference, and reference list.
I think I changed it. That's what happened.
Oh.
Like I say, don't look at these slides because I've made a mistake. I'm normally quite diligent when it comes to updating my slides, but
Normally.
I obviously didn't in this one. So go by what it says on the assessment task. Let's include reference list as well.
Jeez, okay. It's a really short assignment.
Yeah, no reference list included. I'll be stuffed.
If reference list is included, yeah. Let me just have a look, just one moment. I've got my old Mac here and it's so slow. All right, let's have a look. So 1,250, including direct quotes and in-text references. Reference list not included in word count.
But that's part A. If you go right to the top of it, where you have the due date and the length and the weighting and the outcomes.
All right. That's a typo, Warren.
So not including references.
No, so it's including direct quotes and
Yep.
in-text references, but the reference
Mhm.
list is not
Not
included in the
included.
word count. I'm sorry about that, because I know last time we had a big, some of the academics wanted it to be included, or I think it originally was included. That's right, but I just haven't taken out that because it's just for 2,500 words that cannot be including a reference list. That's just insane. So I shall update that, and thank you for pointing that out to me, Warren. I appreciate that. So any further questions? Yes, Fiona, the assessment has contradictory information. Yeah. So the reference list is not included in the word count. I'm going to put out a announcement on Blackboard. That just came up at the same time. Yes, it's going to be confirmed on the announcement page, definitely, and I apologize for that. Any other questions? That's a good point, Warren. In terms of the portrait and landscape, I don't really mind. I can turn my laptop around and read it side on. I do it all the time. I do it all the time. Another question. What number of weeks? What question was that, Helen?
Sorry, I'll take myself off mute. Warren had posted something, if the template is designed to have like how many running weeks is it meant to be for a set period of time or over a term?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. It's up to you. So it could be a short-term plan or it could be a long-term plan. It's up to you what you want it to be. It's very flexible. So it's got here, just as an example, week 1 to 2 to week 1 to 4. So, you know, each of you it's going to be different depending on what your actual action plan is.
Is there a recommended or?
Well, it depends, Helen. So I'd have to know what you are actually planning. If
Yep.
it's something just within your classroom, or, you know, it might be something like developing a new transition to school program, which could take, you know, a
6
year,
weeks or something, yeah.
depending on the systems in your school.
Of course.
It
yeah.
might be a lifetime, yes. in cases.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
That's okay. That was a good, very good question. Anything else? So the same as last time. It has, you know, a certain number of words allocated. And that's just a guide as well. So you might be reading through this in a couple of days and you'll note something, please email me. I'm happy to help you out. And if you see any errors again, please contact me too. All right. I think we might finish up if there's nothing further.
Thanks, Ange.
No worries. Oh, look, I forgot to click on that. Whether short-term plans, long-term, or a combination of both, what is best suited to your future teaching and learning needs? Oh, dear. Okay, everyone, have a great week. Email me if you've got any further questions.
Thank you. Bye, Angela.
Bye-bye.